Tēnā koutou katoa, tēnā koutou. I te kopapa o te rā, tēnā koutou katoa. Tuia te rangi, tuia te papa, tuia te moana, tuia tātou. E rongi te pō, e rongi te o, hui e, tākia.
Thank you, Lynn. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Rob Langford, tiku ingoa. Welcome everyone here today to the Packaging Forum's What's Your Policy? Election 2023 industry event. I'd like to welcome all our members, invited guests, and of course our political representatives here today, along with our brilliant MC for the day, Kerry. So today we have here as Honourable Andrew Warren Clark from the Labor Party.
Not quite honourable.
Not quite honourable. We'll make you honourable today.
Thank you. I'll take it.
I'm allowed special privileges. The Honourable Scott Simpson, National Party, Honourable Uni Jeannie Sage, Green Party, and Mr Simon Court, ACT Party. You're not going to get honourable, sorry.
Might be honourable.
Might be at the end of the day.
One day. Soon.
Okay. I'd say it's great to be here again, but that applies to just about everybody else except for me, because unfortunately I had COVID last year. So before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping things. The toilets are outside the double doors as you came in, and just slightly veer to the right as you walk through. You should find them there. Don't go through the second set of doors. You've gone too far. In the case of a fire or other emergency, if we can just exit out the doors you came in, down the stairs, and we meet out at the front of Gate G on Remmers Ave. Hopefully we won't have that today. Okay, and there will be signs around to help get there. For those that can't hear and you see us running, you know what it is. Otherwise, it's a very strong and loud alarm. So I'm sure you'll hear it. And then, of course, don't disappear if you go out there. Please stay around so we can ensure everybody's safe, and we'll instruct you as to what next. Following the panel discussion today, we'd like to invite you to stay afterwards and along with our politicians and have a few drinks and further your discussions. I'd now like to hand over to Kerry Woodham, who will facilitate this afternoon's discussion. We will be taking questions from the floor, so please have your questions ready. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Oh, and I like the way you did all the health and safety, because that's so boring. But I mean, why get a dog and bark yourself? But you did, so yay, great. I'm glad we did that, thank you. And nice to see our lovely panellists again. It's about 10 months since we were here last time. It was, and some familiar faces as well. I found it incredibly interesting last year. It's even more interesting this year because this is the time for theory and what I might like to do, and in an ideal world, what I'd like to see is over, because there's an election in a few months and we're going to need to see what is actually deliverable, what can be delivered. So we don't want to hear, with all due respect, my darling and valued guests, we don't want to hear in an ideal world. We want to hear what can actually be delivered should you be in the position to be part of a government, not nice to haves, but actually can deliver. There's a list of questions through here, and unlike last year, I think we just asked questions relating back to some of the topics at the end of the discussion, but we'll try and do the questions as we go, so long as we can keep to time, because we are constrained by time. But after we've talked, say, curbside recycling, we can throw it open to the floor, and we have microphones here, so wait for the mic till we get there. So we will start with the curbside collections first of all. I was struck when I was watching the webinar from the Ministry of Environment, how much time was taken up talking about how far New Zealand had to go, how far behind we were when it came to the rest of the world, before they started talking about, you know, the strategy and the policy. And it did seem, why would we not come in with a gold standard, absolutely amazing waste management strategy, given how far behind we are, we might as well start from fresh, from new. So why are we looking like sort of doing a very piecemeal, low-hanging fruit kind of a curbside collection? Councils can only collect plastic 1, 2 and 5. You can't collect any lids, tops, aerosols, liquid paper. I mean, why? Angie?
Well, I think the infrastructure actually has to be in place. Plainly and simply, it's great that we could collect everything, but if we have no infrastructure to manage that, so we will just have to store. So I agree, it would be wonderful to be able to start from zero and build a perfect system, but we literally don't have that, and so we've got to try and build on what we have, I feel.
Thank you, Angie.
Here we go.
Yep.
I'm Scott Simpson. I'm the National Party's environment spokesperson, which includes this, what they call in politics world, delegation for waste. But I'm also the Member of Parliament for Coromandel. And part of the challenges we have is that when a whole lot of lovely Aucklanders come and spend time in the beautiful Coromandel, and then put their curbside recycling out in my part of the world, the rules are different to the rules in Auckland. Now, that creates enormous challenges for us because we separate our glass, we don't commingle, and we do a whole lot of stuff that is different. So all around the country, different rules, different arrangements with councils and different arrangements with the contractors that collect the curbside. So Angie's right to a degree. We don't have the infrastructure. We are years behind many of our European counterparts in how we do recycling. But we're also, if I'm very frank, we are a long way behind the rest of the world, well, many parts of the world, in terms of our mental approach to sorting and to recycling. So the big debate from my point of view is, do we, as Kerry suggests, go for the international best practice gold-plated model in one big leap from where we are today, or do we take an incremental approach and start sorting out some basics and at least getting some consistency nationwide and then move on to the next step and the next step and the next step? Or do we just do this big bite? Well, as much as I'd like to do the big bite, we simply don't have the infrastructure to do that. So unusual to be agreeing with a Labour politician, but sometimes it happens.
Eugenie.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Really pleased to be here today, and thank you to the Packaging Forum for organising another one of these panel sessions. It is an opportunity sometimes to see where parties and MPs agree with what Scott said and with what Angie has said. And we really started this journey last term when I was Associate Minister to actually try and standardise curbside recycling, because as Scott said, it's different all around the country. If we want to reprocess and recycle more materials and shift towards a circular economy, it makes sense to have consistent streams of those materials, to have the councils collecting the same materials across the country so that processors know what sort of volume they're going to get, and we can set up the infrastructure to process them. And am aware within the packaging sector and with product stewardship schemes generally, there's a debate about whether the product stewardship organisations own the materials and how they may want to provide more of the collection services. But I think at the moment the systems are too different. The colours are different. Have a standardised system and then have more consistency across Aotearoa and more decent volumes of materials able to be processed and recycled. And it is getting some runs on the board to inspire people that we can make a difference and then continue to build on that. Kia ora.
Are you in agreement too, Simon?
No, he's not usually.
So my name's Simon Court. I spent 15 years working in the waste industry, including about 6 years on the active face of a landfill. And so my perspective is that whatever we can do to reduce the amount of waste being buried in the ground and leaving this long-term risk to future generations, the better. And yet the trajectory we've been on, since I attended a Wastemen's conference in the early 2000s when a former Labor minister announced zero waste by 2040, we're now burying 1 million tonnes more waste a year in the ground than we were back in around 2005. We're up to about 3.5 million tonnes a year. So sure, we've got a larger population, but we've also got a whole lot of really inefficient collection systems around the country. And from my perspective, from the ACT Party's perspective, one of the reasons it's so inefficient is because local government councils have taken it upon themselves to monopolise collection, to set standards that in many cases are out of whack with actually what the material quality standards should be. For example, you look at Auckland and Christchurch, which carry out mixed recycling collection. It means you've got all of your fibre, your paper and cardboard mixed up with glass. It gets broken, renders a lot of the product unrecoverable or loses its value. So, what ACT would say is, look, those who have the most to gain from getting access to the highest quality resources, because that's what the material that goes into bins is, it's a resource. Those who have the most to gain should be designing the system. It can't possibly be designed by MFE or well-meaning community recycling people and local councils. It can only be designed by the industries that want access to the best materials.
Is there money in muck, Simon?
Absolutely.
Right. So left to the free market, there would be companies that would come along, collect rubbish and turn it into money for themselves.
Well, they already do that. I mean, I live in West Auckland. We have in fact, until recently, we had the opportunity not to pay for Auckland Council's garbage bin, but we've since been patched over under a waste bylaw, which means that even though I can go to my local supermarket and buy a yellow bag for a private waste company, I mean, I only put out half a bag a month. I shouldn't have to pay for this Auckland Council mandated system. The private sector can come and collect my yellow bag along with that of my neighbours who still largely prefer to use that system. It's more convenient. And they can make a profit by handling that waste and managing it in an environmentally friendly way. And I'm sure if they were offered the opportunity to have access to the recycled materials resource stream, they would find a way to make it pay for itself at very little or no cost to the ratepayer. And that's what policy settings should be targeted at delivering.
I have a counter view to that.
Yes, same.
So in terms of recycling, why should we should all be able to have the opportunity to recycle and to use services? So when it becomes a universal service, and yes, we have much more to do, but when it becomes a universal service, so I'm based in Papamoa in Tauranga Moana, and we have a rate-based waste system where we are now being collected across a whole stream. Now, previously, I used to pay my $80 here and my $90 there and my $180 there, and I was wealthy enough to be able to afford to do that. So I would have a private waste stream that I would be able to recycle. The unfortunate thing was the tenants in my rental property were not able to afford that and therefore didn't recycle, and it all went into the single bag, wasn't collected and went straight into landfill. The difficulty with it, with having a pay-as-you-go system, is that only some people can afford to pay as you go, whereas I believe, a system that is universal or based around everyone having access, whether they can afford to recycle or not, is the way we should go.
All right.
Yeah, and I guess the ACT Party philosophy is always to leave everything to the market. But we've got a huge waste issue in Aotearoa. Our production of waste each year, 700 kilograms per person or more, and increasing, as Simon noted. So the market hasn't delivered the solutions. What we do need is a framework of regulation, things like mandatory product stewardship schemes, and increasing landfill levies so that there are incentives for players in the market to do the right thing. So we need a mix of market operators, but we also need a really good regulatory framework. And that's why mandatory product stewardship and things like the container return scheme, which unfortunately the Labor government has decided to delay, were about providing more economic opportunities for businesses, but within are key criteria for how that mandatory product stewardship scheme should work, and dealing with the litter problem and the plastic pollution from beverage containers going into the ocean. So you need the market, but you also need a really strong regulatory framework, and you need economic instruments like the landfill levy as well.
You
And
also,
you need a change of attitude,
Yeah.
society
Beliefs and
attitude,
values.
actually.
that's
Yeah.
quite true.
Because forever, it's been far too easy and simple and convenient for us to just dig a hole in the ground,
Yeah.
fill it up, and when the hole gets full, we cover
is
it up.
not
and then we-
easy,
and then we
simple.
go and then we go and dig another hole.
Cheap.
And so we have an historic issue. We've got a massive problem with legacy landfills all around the countryside. But surely the long-term answer is to change our attitudes as a society about how we manage waste, how we recycle, and how we do that. We've managed to do that in my lifetime with things like drink driving, with smoking, seat belts, those sorts of things. Surely it's not beyond our wit to have a societal change of attitude to recycling and looking after the stuff that we throw away, because as we all know in this room, there is no away, it all goes somewhere.
the good thing too is that there is so much buy-in from industry as well, who want to be part of any solution that takes place. But the one thing I was wondering, you've got the curbside collection starting in February 2024 that will only be able to collect certain types of plastic, steel and aluminium cans, glass bottles, paper, cardboard. They can't collect a lot of other things. You've got a huge industry-wide consultation process going on that finishes around 4 to 6 months after curbside collection is introduced. Why wouldn't you wait for the industry and all the stakeholders to come up with their recommendations, which surely must be better informed?
So just a correction there, Kerry, though. There has already been quite considerable consultation with the industry and with councils about curbside collection and how to standardise it. And the fact that it is restricted to number 1 plastic, PET, number 2, number 5, polypropylene, aluminium cans, glass and the like, glass should be kept separate, does mean that you will get businesses recognising the opportunity to take those material streams and do something with them.
Sure, but why have the consultation?
Well, the consultation is wider. It's been on the
Yeah.
waste strategy, and there's
Yeah.
new waste minimisation legislation planned next term based on the waste strategy that's made that commitment to standardise curbside recycling and also getting all food waste out
Yeah.
of landfill to help with climate.
Okay.
Kerry, I wonder if I can give you an example. So recently I had an opportunity to do a virtual meeting with the people from Tetra Pak in Australia. And they have partnered with a company in Hamilton called SaveBoard. And so Tetra Pak products, you know, those things that currently we don't put in our curbside recycling. This outfit in Hamilton makes this construction board out of old Tetra Paks. Now, in order to make SaveBoard work, they need volume. They need lots of Tetra Pak things returned and collected. The way to do that from their point of view is to include it in curbside recycling, because at the moment Tetra Paks aren't included, and so they just get landfilled. And the net result is a really good technology that can be useful is teetering, well, no, that's probably the wrong word, for it to be economically viable, which I think it is, but to really succeed, it needs volume. So the trick is, how do we capture that volume? How do we make it work? And what are the rules and regulations and laws to accommodate that?
Will it be easy to add stuff to curbside recycling as it becomes economically viable?
So I think part of it is around the market, right? So something like that, that's going to drive in that particular area, perhaps. But again, it comes down to the infrastructure. What is the use of that product? Where can it go? Where can it be stored until there is a market for it? Or if there is a market for it currently, how do we do it in a way that actually enables the entire country and economies of scale? We all know we've got a long, skinny country, and the infrastructure is difficult from the South Island, west coast of the South Island, or right down in Dunedin versus Northland. And that's our difficulty, right? It's great economies of scale in big cities, but we've got all sorts of rural communities as well that's not going to necessarily work for.
And I
So,
don't
okay.
think you can rely on curbside to collect all materials, and that's where product stewardship schemes, like the container return scheme, with the intention that there be drop-off points, reverse vending machines at supermarket and their car parks, collection depots. So there will be a range of ways of getting product to place and not just curbside. But agree with Scott, it is the volume of material that you actually need to make solutions like that economic. But we need different systems, and producer responsibility schemes and the collection systems there play a key role.
Can I just add a question or a comment on here? So part of your standardisation did not explicitly state that glass should be collected separately, yet globally, by all schemes, all countries, that is the first fundamental change they made, yet the decision has been made not to make that mandatory. Can you explain why you wouldn't have done what was simply the most principled and easiest thing to do?
Sometimes it's good to be sitting in between a Labor and a Green MP. So over to you guys.
So I've had the benefit of a recent meeting with Rob, and the regulations do not require glass to be separated. I think they should, because if you mix in glass, it just creates problems with processing of other materials. I think MFE may have assumed that more councils were moving towards separation that they didn't need to regulate, but I think that was a mistake. And if the Greens are in a position, we'll try and make sure that that is actually fixed. So glass has to be collected separately, not commingled.
And, certainly wherever I am, there is a separation. But again, I'm in an urban community. I would agree that we should be moving to that.
But the simple reality, Angie, is that the two largest metropolitan urban authorities in the country, Christchurch and Auckland, don't separate. And I'd put it to you that the reason they don't is because it's convenient for those councils to have it that way. Nothing more, nothing less.
How many bins go out?
And if I could just add, I mean, if you look at the way that Auckland Council has invested in waste minimisation, they've spent years designing a system to roll out curbside collection for compost and food scraps, and a whole fleet of trucks manufacturing plastic bins and handing them out, even though the results of their own studies showed only about 15% of households would take up such a service. And yet the opportunity to separate glass from fibre is right there and has value. And the organisations that see glass as a commodity, as a valuable resource, no doubt would help Auckland Council design the system that works. So I think we really have to stop expecting governments to design systems that work and actually ask the people who benefit most from having access to these good quality resources, could you please design the system? And if that means changing regulations, amending the Waste Minimisation Act to allow the private sector to get access to the highest quality materials, then that should be the role of government, not trying to design a perfect curbside collection system from Environment House in Wellington.
Well, it sounds like every party wants to make sure that glass is collected separately.
Quite.
An undertaking? Excellent.
Except that Scott's right, the contracts that Auckland and Christchurch have, that may be problematic because then you have to buy out of that contract. And then the solution to that probably is more investment in the MRF for separation, but it just makes it so much easier to keep it out.
Well, these are all opportunity costs.
source.
Auckland Council could have taken that decision to modify contracts. Instead, they've gone and wasted a whole lot of ratepayers' money on literally carting wet food waste to Taupo to turn into biogas. I mean, as a civil and environmental engineer, someone who hopes one day to be making decisions about how to allocate taxpayer funds in an efficient way,
Not if we can help
I'm absolutely dumbfounded by decision-making like that. And of course, enabled by, Green and Labor parties for the last 6 years.
There was consensus there briefly for a moment, I'm sure I heard. Do you have questions? I'm pretty sure there will be questions from the floor regarding curbside recycling. Over here, thank you.
Okay, so Josh from Sustainable Coastlines. This is a bit of a selfish question. We do a lot of waste management, but more importantly, environmental monitoring of waste. and just really interested on your policies or your investment strategies around monitoring and data and getting this sort of information to make decisions and policy decisions.
There's been an absolute lack of definitive data, hasn't there, over the years?
Bang on, Josh, and really acknowledge Sustainable Coastlines, the number of beach cleanups I've been on that Sustainable Coastlines has run, and they collect everything at the end, sort it all out into ice cream containers, weigh it. It's really good information on what's on our beaches. And one of the best things about going on beach cleanups now, since we banned single-use plastic bags, is you don't find those. We did previously. So it's recognised that there's a huge data gap. One of the first things in terms of increasing the landfill levy was getting decent weigh bridges at the landfills, so there'd be better data there. So government is, if Labor is re-elected and the Greens are in a position, state of the environment reporting legislation, much more environmental monitoring required to actually understand what is happening, and more data on waste is critical. A lot of industries have it, but they are not willing to share. So how do we get systems so that they can share, so that everybody benefits from more information and more evidence?
Scott?
There's actually some really good work being done by our Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, Simon Upton, who is got a big brain and is focused on a whole range of really compelling issues that confront us as a nation in terms of environmental stuff. And he did a report last year about data that we collect as a country, much of it irrelevant, much of it just historic, simply because we've always done it. And nobody sort of asks the question of, well, why do we collect this information, and what more importantly, what do we do with it once we've collected it? It's not joined up. Now, so he raises those very good questions, but the good news is that if we were to invest some of the, and it would be in broad terms a relatively small amount of the money that is currently invested on collecting data that's not used, and we re-diverted that to collecting relevant data that was going to be useful, then that would be a very good thing. The good news, as I was about to say, was that the collection of data is increasingly easy to do and increasingly less costly than it used to be. So there are some opportunities there for us as a nation.
We have a question from the floor.
Hi, my name is Mark Stevens. I'm from Essity. Firstly, I had to have a question for the panel, but firstly, Scott, as a visitor to the Coromandel from Auckland, I think along with every other Aucklander who goes there, I wonder why your recycling ratios allow for 1 day's collection of glass in a little bin you give versus 1 season's collection of other products in a large bin you give. I think you got them around the wrong way. And that you can fill a bin in a day quite easily, the bottle bin. Anyways.
Well, most of our Auckland visitors fill up a bin really quickly of glass. I've noticed when I've been out walking around and checking.
My question to the panel is that will you or your parties commit to adopting a United Nations recommended approach to using science-based approach to waste and waste measurement? I think the example of the Auckland Organic Collection is an example of a slogan-driven policy and approach rather than a science-based approach. Our company sends about 5.5 million bundles of toilet paper, kitchen towel and hand towel around the country every year, every single one of them wrapped in a poly bundle. We are unique in our industry in that we undertake life cycle assessments of all of our products, from the forest to the flush, and we actually go and publish environmental product declarations from that so that they are peer tested, and we can tell you unequivocally that the overall environmental impact of packaging our product in poly bundles as opposed to a cardboard carton is significant. Yet I think I would say if you went to any member of the public or if you were asked as a politician what was the most preferable outcome, you would say put it in carton. So my question is, will you commit to adopting a science-based approach to the measurement of environmental impacts?
Short answer is that we in the National Party do. That's one of the fundamental principles of all our environmental policy. It's our blue-green principles, is that it must be science-led. So it's a yes from us.
And a yes from the Greens, because that's also the basis for all of our policies. But there's often competing information. So the key is which information is correct. and advocates for different interests will use the same information differently. So it's having to navigate through that, which is why someone like the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment is so useful, because they are providing independent advice, and why with the Climate Commission, that's deliberately independent so that government is getting that robust independent advice. So you've got to have an institutional framework that ensures you're getting that independent advice. And one of the big pitfalls in policy making at the moment.
Have some water. There are lots of big pitfalls in policy at the moment, is I think what Jenny was going to say. But
I think one of the things
Right.
that you will know about the Labour Party is that we do follow the science around many issues. Science is often nuanced, and as Eugenie has said, who's got the best science at the time can be debatable. So it is, we are all on the Environment Select Committee, all of us, so we all have the PCE come before us. And again, his job is to be independent and of Parliament and to give us good science and good advice, which,
and also to ask hard questions,
yeah.
which he does
yeah.
very regularly.
And
The other
so-
thing though too is that, you know, we've seen the growth of the public service under this government. So I think, I mean, I'm going to be a journalist and grossly exaggerate, but under National, the Ministry for the Environment was like 5 people, under Labor it's 500. So what is going to happen with all that information, all that work, all that data collection, if there's a national government? Are you going to throw the baby out with the bathwater?
Well, there won't be so many meetings.
Well, not if there's only 5 people, there won't be, no.
Well, just to give you the exact numbers, 5.5 years ago, MFE had about 470 employees. Now they have close to 1,000. So it's a policy ministry that has effectively doubled. But in fairness to them, a lot of them, an army of them, have been involved for years trying to sort out our resource management legislation. And we, as members of the Select Committee, are donkey deep in that right at the very minute. So they've certainly been working hard. Whether it has been working effectively and constructively is a whole different debate.
But, you know, if there is a change of government where you have people working on policy and policy direction, is there a meta policy that will not go? Or are there going to be projects that will be lost, or?
I think that it's probably fair to say that if my colleagues and I have the opportunity to lead a government at the end of the year, there would be a finessing of the direction. So if I have a criticism of what's happening at the moment, is that there's no joined-uppedness about it. There's a whole lot of multiple different projects, all being done sort of simultaneously, but all in silos. And that worries me because I don't see a lot of real effectiveness about that. Much of it is highly aspirational, and it's a bit like the plastic wrap versus the cardboard. The romantic notion might say do cardboard, but the practical science and economic and environmental approaches says plastic wrap. So I think that you have to have a practical wash through the romantic notion of much of what is being done.
Yeah, and I think the environment is our priority and needs to be maintained as our priority. And I think if we don't have a healthy environment across the spectrum, then it's great and good to be having a smaller, more lean, more efficient ministry, but actually if our environment isn't cared for and we don't focus on it, this is where we are crucial to the world. We sell our clean green image.
Which is bullshit, basically.
Well, exactly, but if we don't invest in the environment and taking care of it, then I think that's going to be a problem.
Simon?
But let's just think about just one thing that MFE's been working on for years, the update to the Waste Minimisation Act. You know, the waste levy has increased phenomenally from when I used to work in the waste industry, and yet half of that money is handed back to local councils to subsidise the gate rates on their own tipping in landfills. So if a Ministry for Environment designing policy wanted to deliver policy that actually minimised waste to landfill, they might say, hey, we're collecting all this money at the landfill gate, why not make it 100% contestable? So some of the people in this room and your suppliers, people who actually know how to recover materials from mixed waste streams, could bid for all of that money. And local government at that point might be faced with a situation where they say, hey, you know what, rather than us trying to monopolise collection, monopolise the waste streams and treating our own landfills as if it's some kind of cash cow and ignoring the long-term risks and costs, maybe we will just leave it to the private sector, because it turns out that they already supply the trucks, they already supply the landfills, and if a future, even potentially they could supply other technology like pyrolysis or more waste for energy, as we've seen with Golden Bay Cement taking tyres on waste timber. So look, I don't think the answers lie in Wellington, and unlike Scott, a government that involves ACT, and it looks like there might be quite a few ACT MPs around a cabinet table after October 15, we won't be looking to finesse, we won't be looking to trim the sails. What Kiwis are asking for is real change, and when it comes to environmental issues, like Kiwis are also not satisfied with where we've got to.
And that's why I think people should be really worried if their ACT is any part of the government, because they utterly rely on the private sector. And what we've heard from Simon is a failure to recognise that it has been councils and community which have borne the costs of collecting and dealing with waste, generally to landfill in the past, from generated by private companies not taking responsibility for the waste that they create through the supply chain. For example, takeaways. Who cleans up all the takeaway litter? It's been councils that do that. So we've got to have a system where there is a framework that recognises the role of the private sector, but doesn't just open everything up to the private sector and not have a role for regulation and leadership by government.
But Eugenie, sometimes it seems that, Christian groups won't ever be able to take over government because they fracture and fight amongst themselves. And to a certain extent, environmentalists do that too. You've got the purists on one hand, and then you've got the ones who are like, oh, okay, well, no, pyrolysis is better than just dumping it into a landfill. And
But we've got, and this
once
is
you
where
start fighting amongst yourselves, it makes it hard to present an alternative, legitimate proposal.
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Well, I'm just
there,
thinking of the
Kerry.
pyrolysis ones, which
okay. So
seem to make sense. And then you've got people outside, some people who identified as green were activating for them. And then you've got the other Greens on the outside with their signs going, this is a landfill in the sky.
So the waste to energy, using municipal waste and burning it is treating the atmosphere like a tip. But for some difficult product, butchery waste, freezing works, that sort of waste, an anaerobic digester, closed system is potentially appropriate. I had the privilege earlier this afternoon, though, with food waste, that can be composted rather than necessarily going to a digester. Eden Park has got a small area that they let a community composting network take all of the food waste from every single game or big event here, including the FIFA games that are coming up, and it's turned into compost, goes out to community gardens, and you've got a community hub around the stadium.
So that's not going to solve 3.5 million tonnes of waste to landfill every year, isn't it?
Still.
I mean, this is the attitude that's got us to this place. I mean, if we were going to solve
it always just exaggerates.
But there is a place for regulation.
We have a lot of fun on select committee.
Yeah.
But regulating
quite
down
well.
to the which technology is preferred, which technology solutions are acceptable, is not going to help us solve these long-term problems. It's not going to help keep microplastics off the beaches. And so, we actually need to be more open-minded. I mean, if we reform the RMA so that it was much easier to stand up waste sorting and processing, recycling infrastructure, in our urban areas.
So that is a key part, you know that, Simon,
Yeah.
you've been on the committee, that is a
is.
key part of the changes. That waste infrastructure is infrastructure that can get that easier consenting pathway.
Exactly.
But what is
it's not
wrong
just saying
with
waste
contesting?
infrastructure, all infrastructure.
Sorry, Kerry.
So that's okay, I interrupted you too. But you did start, Simon, on the next question I had, which is that the waste levy is increasing year on year. And the MFE is looking at changing the formula of how it's allocated to council, but still maintaining 50% for council. Why shouldn't it be thrown open to the best, most achievable, most scientific, most cost-effective form of management?
There's an and there though, isn't there? There's the opportunity to subcontract as well. And you know, it doesn't have to be black and white around this. So,
Well, it's 50-50.
Yeah, so why do councils
So there's
get
a
it?
very good argument, in my view, for reassessing the formula
Yeah.
with the increased revenue that comes from a rise in the waste levy rate. There's a lot more money floating around, there's
Yeah.
a lot more dosh in the pot. Now,
Yeah.
currently, it's allocated 50-50 on waste minimisation projects and initiatives, and the other 50% goes to various councils to administer their transfer stations and so forth. My concern is that if you have a bigger pot of money and you allocate still 50% to the territorial authorities, that they won't need all of that to run their transfer stations and what have you, and that they will then start embarking on well-intentioned but not joined up initiatives in their local patch, which amount to little more than pork barrel nice things, that then compete with maybe nationwide commercial operators for the same waste stream. So I don't think that makes sense, and I think there's a real argument for reassessing the formula of the distribution of the levy.
Is that a commitment from National?
We want to have a look. We've committed to having a look at the formula, because I don't think that 50% split is necessarily the right split going forward.
So it'd be interesting whether ACT even agrees to the levy. It's our one environmental tax, the landfill levy. It goes up to $60 a tonne on the 1st of July. We'll be raising $264 million by the end of next year annually. Scott mentioned before closed landfills, the legacy landfills like Fox River. We need to invest in remediation there. Some of the levy funds could potentially be used for that. The new waste minimisation legislation, I understand, will have criteria around how councils can spend their levy portion. They have to do a waste minimisation plan. Councils need to be minimising waste at the community level, so the Green Party still agrees with 50% going to councils, 50% going to central government, which goes into the waste minimisation fund, which is open to businesses to apply for, and councils to assist their waste minimisation efforts. In Australia, a lot of the levy revenue goes into the consolidated fund. It needs to be ring-fenced for waste minimisation. We've got a long way to go, and that funding's useful.
Yeah, I think Jenny makes a good point. There's a whole lot of closed landfills around New Zealand which are at real risk from climate change, from sea level rise, from natural processes. Auckland Council has its fair share. I think they've got about 50 that they've got consents for, and no realistic budget to remediate. And there's a lot more like Fox Glacier, Fox and others. So I think the waste minimisation fund criteria need to be looked at. We need to look at contestability for all kinds of projects that actually reduce environmental risk. Because picking winners, picking technologies, designing criteria that find a way to send more money to marginal electorates that Labor might want to win in the future. I mean, who knew?
I beg your pardon?
None of that helps, because the real risk we face is leaving harmful substances in the ground where they might enter the receiving environment, be a risk to marine mammals, for example, human health. And you can design a life cycle analysis, a multi-criteria analysis to work out where's the best place to invest using appropriate weightings. And that's really where we should be targeting our efforts and our spend, minimising risk to the environment.
Just before I throw open questions to the floor on that one, I was just interested, given that so many members of the forum have been involved in voluntary product stewardship schemes for such a long time, how many in the room could say that the changes that are coming up to curbside collection would negatively impact your organisation or business or customer experience?
Oh, good, we're doing the right thing.
Show of hands might be good.
Oh, show of hands. How many think that it's going to negatively impact on
It's not going to change anything, Kerry.
isn't it?
Why not?
So my
Can you have a mic, then
Yes,
everybody
sorry.
can hear?
So, we're volunteers, but Mr. Simpson makes a good point about the Safe Board, but which is quite a fledgling thing. Soft plastics are entirely industry funded, as you're well aware. So And when it comes time to curbside collections, they're not accepted through. And yet we have a beautiful zero waste solution at the moment, only commercialised through the front of supermarkets.
Yeah.
And with some of us trying to take that into our best industry to help our biggest clients achieve zero waste. At what point are you going to start funding this to build infrastructure? My example is, and Jerome's here from Future Post, he is asking industry to help him expand out his capital and infrastructure to collect soft plastics. And he's asking industry, he's not able to get anything across the line with central government.
Exactly.
So my question is, when are you going to stump up?
So, I mean, Future Post can always apply to the Waste Minimisation Fund, and I think it has done that
On
in-
multiple
in
occasions.
the past.
Never had a red cent.
And I guess we do need to reduce our use of plastics, and soft plastics might be one, but the carbon accounting is, I don't know whether anyone's done that life cycle analysis over all the different packaging options. The product stewardship scheme for plastic packaging should help address some of these issues and a narrower palette of materials. I don't have the answer on that soft plastic, sorry, but industry does have a bit of a responsibility. You can't just load all of that onto government if people are producing products in that material. And I'm not sure that fence posts are necessarily the option, because what happens to that in 100 years' time? Does it break down into microplastics?
We say this, Minister Sage, but then you've also taken a position through the Ministry for Environment that you take a not for now position with compostables, and yet they're flooding into the market and most of the time going off to landfill.
So I'm no longer involved with them as Minister, but with compostables, my understanding is that there is a working party that has been going for a bit long on actually trying to get some decent labelling, because compostables are a problem with some of the recyclables in terms of the processing. So yes, compostables are not the answer with plastics, I agree. And I don't know why that labelling scheme has taken so long. I think we probably do need regulations there. So plastics are complex. So Rob, who's perhaps more involved, may
Yeah, I
have an answer
think
there.
firstly, we could look at the comment around the funding. I mean, we generally look around the world and see what's happening, and we know very well, just across the ditch in Australia, Save Board has just had a significant investment to stand up a plant in Australia to fund it. I know there's discussions around things like Future Post. So you've got a government that's, you often talk to, we like to compare ourselves to Australia, yet
Bigger
we're looking
market.
at a government that is investing in potential solutions to drive down waste, and yet we've taken a completely reverse view on that. So we do find that rather an interesting approach. On the labelling front, I mean, most of our members here are investing very heavily into the ARL label, so it's an Australasian recycling label. And it is getting quite a lot of impetus and drive through a lot of brands. However, just the recent announcement on the curbside has thrown an absolute curveball into that labelling system, because of the way it works. It talks about every element of that product being recyclable, and if just one thing, the capital, isn't, then it gets in there. And I know there's many members that will talk more clearly to this, but there are many members out here that have realised they have many items on their shelves now that they made significant investments and changes into the material types to make them recyclable, e.g. changing PET bottles with a PET cap on it, to say caps are now not in there.
Right.
So it's now not recyclable, yet they've invested huge funds in it. And I know some of them are asking whether they should even be on the shelf to meet their 2025 sustainability requirements.
Well, I'm sure we'll all have suggestions, but representations to the new Minister, Honourable Rachel Brooking, about some of these are quite detailed issues, but they need a solution.
Well, they're real issues.
And they're real, they're real issues.
Caused by bad policy.
Not discounting
Well,
them,
caused by people are trying to do their best in the ministry.
trying to do the
They
right
should
thing.
just stop. I reckon you guys have probably come up with a better
But yeah,
plan.
just come
But it goes to the real issue around a whole lot of legislative initiatives, not just in the environment, not just in the waste space. Business and communities and citizens need certainty. If you are a business wanting to invest significant lumps of capital in a new processing facility or a new packaging system or whatever that might have a lifetime of 20, 30, 40 years, you want to be certain that that capital investment is not going to be redundant because of the swipe of a legislative pen
isn't that the market,
in a year or two to come. And I think that's exactly the situation that Rob's explaining to now. Businesses that have invested significant capital on the basis of what they thought was certainty, and the rules have been changed.
But isn't that what happens as we learn more
Only under
things
the
and
last
change?
6 years, Angie.
Yeah.
And that's why Kiwis are asking for a change of direction, aren't they?
Better,
Oh, I see technology,
Yes,
right.
we recognise that things shift and change, and so we cannot ever guarantee a business can stay viable because the science has shifted or changed. Like we don't really do that.
So the science of lids, I would have thought, was reasonably settled.
Well, in that example, yes, but I mean, you can't just say someone has invested for a huge plant and they actually now, it's no longer a viable thing because suddenly it's
Well, can I
identified as poisonous or
Can I
whatever.
take a
in
leaf
the
out of Kerry's book for a minute? So do you think we should have alignment with, say, Australia, for instance? Should we just have a parallel model that works with Australia? And if that is the case, should it be Australia or New Zealand that sets what the parameters are, what the rules are?
Oh, you asking me?
Well, just generally. I mean, I think it's
Because I think one of the
small
things
market.
that, yeah,
and
we do
much
have
of our
to.
packaging actually comes, is fed to us
One of the things we
internationally.
do have to look at is economies of scale, I think. And I think it's really important that we actually evaluate. And like, we have to take responsibility here. 750 kilos of waste a year is what we waste ourselves. So we do need to do some. We can't just send it to Australia. We have to take responsibility as
No,
well.
No, it wasn't
I'm not
sending it, it
suggesting
was
sending
a-
it to Australia. I'm suggesting, do we have alignment of regulation and rules that match our nearest, largest trading partner?
That would appear to be no. We'll go to the floor.
Thank you.
Oh, hello. Can you hear?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Melissa from Foodstuffs. Look, I wanted to get involved in the conversation because I think there's some threads here that I'd like to bring together with a comment and then a question to the respective parties. So Foodstuffs, obviously, we're an aggregator of product. We do have some private label products, but we sell a lot of other people's products. We're heavily interested in becoming a more sustainable business and seeing more recycling occurring. We made submissions to the Transforming Recycling process last year, and we did advocate for a wider range of materials to be collected. And the materials that we asked to be collected, some of which have been talked about this afternoon, soft plastics is one, liquid paperboard and foil. We know that they are potentially recyclable. We don't currently have the infrastructure and the systems to do it. But here is the question. This is a chicken and egg question. The systems, the investment, etc., won't happen until there is a critical mass of material and something to do with it, and an imperative to act to collect it and resolve that issue. So we saw the regulation as being the turning point or pivotal point to make that investment happen. And we're very disappointed that essentially what we've seen is a dumbing down in terms of the standardisation process, where it's the lowest common denominator of the materials that can be widely collected. And the question that arises for me is, well, actually, one more comment. Having asked the ministry why that was, we understand that the design of the curbside standardisation regime really hinged on the advice that the material collectors gave in terms of what they can currently collect, what's practical to collect now. And so for us, it's really disappointing that there wasn't some, I suppose, longer-term vision around how we develop these markets and the role that government should play in creating the impetus for that to occur. So my question to the respective parties is, we have the situation now, we're going to have a broad range, we're going to narrow range of materials that will be collected widely right across New Zealand. That's positive. But there are a whole lot of things that could be recycled that won't be recycled. And I don't see the path for those things coming into the regime. So the question to the respective parties is, what role does government have to play in bridging that gap, in making that transition occur? Is it about government investing with the material collectors and the MRFs, etc., to make that infrastructure, put that infrastructure in place so these things can be collected? Or is it about setting up an expectation that these things will be regulated and requiring the industry to act itself? Because doing nothing is not really the answer. We don't see the plan. Sorry, that was a long spiel.
That was good.
Kia ora, Melissa. Thank you for pulling those threads together and really good commentary. I think it's a fundamental thing about how we develop policy. We've got to start somewhere with standardised curbside recycling, which I think quite a few of us agreed. And then what are the sector's priorities for what happens next? And going back to the lids, are they not being collected because they're a hassle on the trucks, or because the MRFs aren't there with those air compressors to separate them? What's the practical reason why they can't be at the moment? And what are the different industries, what are the priorities for what comes next on curbside recycling? And then can that existing infrastructure of the trucks and the MRFs actually deal with that? Or will it require a second truck, which is not efficient in terms of climate pollution? So this is where the real things, the practical things really matter in terms of what levers you're going to use. And I think maybe the industry needs to talk to the MFE people more, not just rely on putting in a submission, not just rely on interacting with the politicians, but actually with officials, so that there's an understanding of what the real issues are for you.
I think that's easier said than done.
I was just going to say, have you tried?
Yeah, have you tried?
Even as media, it's really tough to get through to any kind of government about.
Can I offer a perspective
Maybe,
on Melissa's comment and question? So I had a really interesting chat with one of the delegates here when I arrived about these foil lids that are on the top of the milk and the juice. It's explained to me that they can't be recycled, but in order to achieve their goal, their business goal of 100% recyclable products, they're going to have to find a way to deal with them. And I guess my question is, are you chasing the right objective? Because if you're asking the government to transfer taxpayer funds to chase down that last half of 1% of something to stop it getting into a landfill, is that where government and local government should best be investing? Or if we thought that microplastics entering waterways, ending up on beaches was a problem, maybe the investment could be in better catchment protection for urban stormwater networks, and maybe funding local councils to actually send a vacuum truck around and hoover those things out before all that material ends up in our harbours. So for every investment demand, there is an opportunity cost and something else we're not investing in and doing. And so I think when we're evaluating what kind of the design of a perfect curbside collection system, maybe we also need to keep in mind that there are other things that we desperately need to invest in New Zealand in order to protect our environment. And we should at least have some idea about how these priorities are being ranked when organisations like MFE are designing policy.
Like an Infrastructure New Zealand type ranking.
I think,
Lynn?
I've got a number of answers to because to your question, Eugenie, we do speak a lot to the ministry officials, and we are confused because the answer that we got around caps and lids and tops was that they were being excluded because they are too small.
Yeah.
But the point that we are making is that a tin can lid is more than 55 millimetres and can be extracted by a metal detector. A margarine tub lid is certainly bigger and can go back on the tub, as can an ice cream box tub lid. But the explanation that we had was they were too small, and then it was easier to tell everybody no lids at all then they would be confused, because people can't tell the difference between a margarine tub lid and a bottle top. So when we've looked at the numbers and on the fractions of this, there's actually about 6,000 tonnes of plastic we're going to lose because we're not putting lids back on our tubs. And there's also 6,000 tonnes of metal that we're going to lose because we're not recycling our metal lids. So that's 12,000 tonnes of material, which isn't an insubstantial amount, if you take the whole of the packaging. And it's things that I, as a consumer in a household, think I can recycle. And I would be really offended if I have to extract my Heinz Beans can lid and put it in the rubbish and my margarine tub lid, because
That's why you can't trust government.
so my answer to the
Thank goodness for the ministry telling us what to do.
so the ministry
how to live.
don't seem to understand themselves why they've set that particular rule.
That's exactly right. And isn't that the problem with allowing Wellington to make those sorts of decisions? Wasn't it the Packaging Forum that did a program in school or something about on lids? Rob,
Yep.
can you just
Yep,
let
so
us
we,
know?
the
I remember
Packaging
it was
Forum
quite an-
invested with Plastics New Zealand and our actuals here to a trial in the Hawke's Bay around, I think it was 7 or 8 schools to collect lids and caps. And we had a massive conversation with the ministry on that one. They're almost saying, well, how are you defining them? And we went, lids and caps. So what if they send them that? Well, we don't really care. We'll learn something. But that was a very successful trial over a very short period of time. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we got close to 2 tonne of material
Of lids.
over one term. Well supported by community groups and Lions and the schools. But from where we sit, there's no clear pathway if we were to try and invest and create that system that it would be sustainable in the long term, knowing that things like the CRS is going to deal with the caps or this is going to deal with the caps, right? So we're getting no certainty. We're getting confusing messages or almost being told not to do it by the ministry. Yet we've got people out here that want to do it.
And like in my own community, we've got a localised solution. So precious plastics, we collect lids and use them. And so there will be localised solutions, but I take your point, absolutely. Doesn't it annoy you when you have to take your lid off something and put that to one side and that to the other side?
So I think we've all got the message that we have a lids and caps issue, but I think that's what makes the whole waste issue so
Complex.
fascinating, because there are all these really practical things that need to be solved, and we need the system and the pathway. Get your point, Rob. So I think you've left us all with that it's a very clear message about lids and caps.
But it's just not just the lids and caps, is it? I come back to foodstuffs point as well. It's like there's so much more, and I know perhaps in an ideal world we could have this, seeing as we've got nothing, we might as well build something beautiful and new and purpose-built and world class. I guess that we can't, so we start baby steps, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of clear path to what will happen next. We've got people who want to come in and set up schemes like the bio plant NZ, and then people protest against that. And
No, the protest has been against municipal waste, mixed municipal waste going and being burned.
Yeah.
It's
It's very
not against-
different.
There is
Yeah.
a role for biogas, but it's not using mixed municipal waste and just burning it and then having to deal with the really toxic residue and the dioxin emissions that you get.
the man with the mic gets it first, and then the man up the front gets it second.
Hey, good day. My name is Josefa. I'm from Goodman Fielder. 2 questions. Number one, which is the country of a comparable population that we probably look up to from a recycling ecosystem? Which one is that? That's the first question.
Good question.
Would it be Ireland?
Okay.
I don't know.
So whatever they are doing, what's stopping us from doing that?
Good question.
We started really late. We had the Waste Minimisation Act in 2008 and not a lot was done to use it. We are well behind the rest of the world. We are trying to use international experience to catch up. We've got a long way to go.
We have got a long way to go. But in New Zealand, we have this perverse Kiwi psyche that says we have to invent every wheel ourselves and that we have to have a uniquely New Zealand solution to everything. We don't. We should look with confidence to best practice in other jurisdictions, particularly in the jurisdictions that are a bit like ours. So Ireland, what are the Australians doing? What are the Canadians doing? What are they doing in the UK and that sort of thing? So we shouldn't be afraid, in my view, to frankly, plagiarise good ideas, and then if necessary, put a Kiwi wash through them.
Great. The other question is a little bit more complicated, but basically, let's say in the future, 5 years, 10 years, infrastructure is in place, policies are in place, everything is good to go. What are your parties specifically going to do to motivate people to actually do the right thing and recycle? Because I think at the moment, the biggest problem is consumer education. People are just confused. An example is if you look at the Auckland Council app, Binny, for example, it's absolutely terrible. I've used it. You put in information, it gives you wrong information, or it will say, I do not know. So I think that's the key. So what are your parties specifically going to do for consumers to educate them, but communicate very clearly to them that we've got everything in place? You've got to do what you need to do to recycle.
We have to make it easy for people to do the right thing. And it's been my experience that often, too often, central government and local government make it complicated and confused for people.
I think it's really going to depend on what government you get in over the next 5 years. If you get ACT in, they'll just step right back from the government taking any leadership and leave it to the market. We do need that leadership. And there are already schemes like Keep New Zealand Beautiful. Its whole litter education campaign has really helped in terms of how whole awareness there. But people need to buy less in terms of packaging. And now everybody takes their own bag to the supermarket. That's become really easy. It's it is changing attitudes. Keep cups are more prevalent. They're only little things. More people composting at home. Again, another smaller thing, but it is step by step. But we do need to.
And Goodman Field are getting rid of the little plastic ties on the top of the bread bags.
Yes, please.
Very useful.
I mean, that's all faffing around the margins, isn't it? I mean, if I could just respond to what Scott said, we've got to make it easy. I mean, I've got one bin for my recycling in Auckland. I hate to say it, but, I'm pretty sure a lot of the stuff I put in there is wish cycling. So making it easy isn't actually going to produce a better raw material that can be recovered, reused by the industries.
Yes, it is.
Well, you might make it easy for the consumer, but is it actually making it easier to recover, say, for example, separate glass from fibre? Because it's very easy to put everything in one bin in Auckland, but that doesn't mean we get a really good quality product out the back end. So what I say is, look, you actually have to ask those who have the most to gain to design the system. And if that's the fibre recyclers, they will tell you, look, we would prefer to have glass out of those bins. You talk to the glass company, they'd say, you know what, we'd really prefer to have glass delivered to us for remelting and recycling, separate colours. It's much easier to do that. So, we know what the solutions are. And rather than having MFE or your local council design it and pass a bylaw and force everyone to comply, actually the design, the co-design, should be led by the industries that have the most to gain and, of course, also face the highest waste disposal costs on the back end.
I have
Question from the floor, sorry.
Not a question, but some comments, if I may, Kerry.
Could I just respond before we move on
Sure.
to the next topic? So one of the things I think is so important about behaviour change in our country is that we're all sitting here going, what should we do? What should we do? Actually, the young people are leading us in this space. We don't actually need to motivate them to do stuff. We need to just support them to get on and do it. And that's, when we banned the plastic bag, that was a wholesale response to all of the young people of this country and around the world saying we don't want to see any more turtles dying. Now, I know that that's simplified, but actually social media is a massive change, will help our change of behaviour as well. We have put in place behaviour change bureaucrats that work at MFE. So these are things that are being looked at because we do really need to have a systematic approach to behaviour change, like the campaigns that Scott talked about earlier.
Okay, thank you. Introducing myself, Tony Noel, Independent Chair of the PPPS, so developing a scheme to sort out plastic EPR. Just some observations and a comment about the work that the team are doing. Very importantly, looking at the issue of global best practice, which is very much coming up here now in this conversation. So there's been a huge amount of work done in the last 12 months, not only in very, very close cooperation with our Australian colleagues, but also very importantly with Europe and United Kingdom and Ireland, where we are in very regular contact, and particularly with an organisation that you can all go and have a look at online called EXPRA, EXPRA, which is an organisation in Europe that covers 33 countries and very much working on EPR schemes. One of the most important things that's come out of the feedback that we're getting, almost 100%, Rob, you or Lynn, you may confirm or deny this, but almost 100% say your systems must handle all materials. Because if you want to solve the problem in your country, you have to have a solution for the consumer for all materials. Answering a question that came off the floor before, the most obvious country, according to EXPRA, for New Zealand to have a look at, is actually Norway. All right? Because if you look at the geography of Norway, the distribution of population, size of population, etc., that is a country that they immediately, when we asked that question ourselves at a governance group meeting recently, when we had Norway on the screen, EXPRA on the screen, was to say immediately, look at Norway. However, the other country that we should look very closely at as well, and we do, is Belgium. Belgium is regarded in Europe pretty much as the global best practice standard at the moment. Population, I think, in Belgium of between 8 and 11 million people. It's a very small territory, but not an insignificant population. But why look at Belgium? Why are they doing such a good job? This comes down to this issue of consumer behaviour. They have worked really hard on that issue. And of course, in Belgium, you've got people, some people, very small number of people, probably living in the countryside, in the traditional villages. They are very good at separating their waste. But a lot of people, particularly a lot of immigrant populations into Belgium these days, who are living on the 28th floor of a high-rise building and are not coming from a culture of waste separation, everything goes down the chute. Right? So you've got to have systems that are capable of handling all of those combinations and permutations. And it can be done. Right? Now, you are going to end up with, some very small amounts of this and some very small amounts of that, but you can actually put systems in place. It's very clear that other countries are doing that. We have to learn from these global best practice realities. We're too small, quite frankly, to do this on our own. Yes, we've got lots of very, very good young people with very, very innovative minds, but the reality is we're not reinventing the wheel here, right? The wheel is already out there. It's actually working quite well in some big countries. But just to not get too excited, we spoke recently to people representing the European Union and just where they are with their recycling targets for plastic. It's a pretty sad story, quite frankly. They are miles behind where they want to be by 2025. This is not easy anywhere, quite frankly. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good points, Tony. Very good points.
We recently just had a petition come to us around plastic being exported across to countries like Indonesia and Malaysia. Horrific, utterly horrific about us not taking responsibility for our own waste and sending it away. We were all really shocked and it was awful, just awful.
I think one of the realities is, which comes down to the size of New Zealand and the reality of the scale. Certainly, one of our colleagues here next to me today from Pacton, Australia, we'd had this discussion earlier. We will have to accept for the foreseeable future, maybe not forever, right, that we are very much part of CER. We are a trans-Tasman economy. A great deal of what is being sold on the shelves of this country is coming from Australia, and quite frankly, a lot of what we produce is being sold on the shelves in Australia. So we have to see that in the context of movement either way. And if you are moving a plastic waste product across to Australia to go through a pyrolysis process or perhaps a mechanical destruction process, you can't guarantee, in fact, it's highly unlikely that that will come back this way. Because quite simply, the market for that material will not be here in large part, it will be somewhere else. And this comes down to something that I haven't heard discussed at the table yet, but we do hear coming through quite a bit in the conversation is the circular economy.
Yeah.
Right? We have to be realistic about how perfect we can get with a circular economy at the end of the day. Right? Because if you do send plastic offshore to go through a pyrolysis process and then be cracked at an oil refinery somewhere else, we don't have oil refineries here anymore, so you can't crack it here. It's highly unlikely that you're going to be able to create that circle. Thank you.
Well, isn't it a question of how big the circle is? And maybe the circle is not limited to just NZ.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a
I
wider
think
circle.
it's a very good way to look at it, Scott, is that, we are trying to save the planet here. Yes,
Including the
all right.
Pacific.
Okay.
Yeah, but that was Angie's point, because that was the debate on the Select Committee after Lydia Chai's petition about waste going to Malaysia. How big should the circle be? Does our circular economy primarily include Australia and the Pacific, or does it go further than that? So, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll take a few more questions, and then we'll get a statement from each of our panellists, their die in the ditch environmental stance as we go into the election.
Yeah, Yumaria Koto. Hi, it's Catherine. I'm Catherine Nangabear from Countdown Sustainability Team. You spoke earlier about certainty, one of you, and the importance of certainty to business, and an area that I would be really interested to hear all the parties' positions on is the deferred container return scheme. So I'd love to hear, where and when you see that falling and what shape. Yep. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Where's David Parker when you need him?
We've got me.
Yes. Just as good. Andrew, you start.
Okay, so we have deferred it, as everyone knows, and it was basically to do with cost of living. The 20 cent per item. We have agreed that we will look at it again in next term should we be in power.
Scott.
Well, it was ironic, really, that it was thrown onto the bonfire of policy burn-ups when Jacinda Ardern exited Sage left and Chris Hipkins took over. So I think Angie's 100% right. It was a purely political, expedient decision based around the cost of living. No other justification for it.
And what would you do?
Well, we've been a keen supporter of a CRS scheme for a long time.
Yep.
We have some issues with the model that was being proposed, but the principle, we like it.
Yep.
Strongly support our CRS, will be a priority for the Greens, getting it going. The waste minimisation legislation does provide the criteria around extended producer responsibility. That's work still in train. But yeah, I understand there was a business that was setting up a materials recovery plant, and that investment didn't go ahead because of the uncertainty. So deeply disappointed, priority for the Greens.
That's why you can't rely on the government to solve all your problems. So let's just think about, what is a container return scheme designed to do? It's to recover materials that might otherwise be lost to landfill, or, as we hear often, they could end up in the harbour or in the sea. But PET is a very valuable product, and so there is a huge incentive on those who use raw PET to manufacture and supply products like fizzy drinks and so on, to get the product out of the waste stream and to put it back into their industrial process. You don't need the intervention of a government or people who want to put a 20-foot shipping container-sized machine that's going to collect cans and bottles and spit out 20-cent coins or QR codes in every supermarket around New Zealand to deliver that outcome. And the other issue with the container scheme is that you've already got a market for containers like aluminium. And the proposed payout rate was somewhere in the region of 10 or 12 times the commodity price. So, if you're relying on government, on MFE policymakers to design schemes to help us solve that last 1, 2 or 3% of how we keep waste materials out of landfill or out of the ocean, then they're just going to come up with bad ideas and they're going to mix them all up at the same time, and nothing's really going to work. I think it comes back to, what's the incentive to recover materials that have a high value, where we know where we can intervene in a household's weekly or monthly cycle to get those materials from people, or of course even simple things like actually having recycling rubbish bins, in popular areas so that people who are out and about have a choice. It doesn't all have to go into one municipal bin like it does in so many places around New Zealand.
So is that a
ACT
no?
won't support it, but we know there are a whole lot of other solutions that will help recover that residual material that has value.
Why hasn't that happened to date?
Are there any other questions? Yes, down the back. Thank you.
Thanks. Just a follow-on, a supplementary, if you will. Nicola Crennan from New Zealand Wine Growers. So really interested in the discussions earlier around the developments and standardisation of curbside and glass in. So my question to you is if there is a CRS glass in or glass out?
The scheme, as it's been designed, is glass in because it's seen as encouraging more recovery of containers. But then you've got the commingling issues. So I think I won't be in this position because I'm standing down, but just to re-look at that issue. Yeah.
Have you got a view, Angie?
Yeah, a view similar. Glass in to encourage behaviour change. But what we know is the best recycling that happens in this country is currently glass already. So it's and I think there needs to be the ability to continue to do what we're doing, like my curbside, separated, goes out, separate bin, works well. And if we had that across a system already, we wouldn't actually need, if that was across the country, we wouldn't actually perhaps need to put it in as well. So it's a little bit more nuanced, I guess. Yeah.
It seems a shame that it's nuanced down though, doesn't it, rather than nuanced up?
Well, what I mean is that if we had standardised curbside separated glass, which is what I have in the community I live in, then that's our best practice.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't necessarily need to do it other ways. But, on the street, if you've got a glass bottle, it would be great to be able to immediately put it into the system and get the money out or whatever. The voucher for donating to a charity, etc.
Personal view from me, glass in, but I'm conscious that I can see Chris Grant from 5R Solutions in Christchurch sitting down there who does remarkable stuff with car windscreens. What was it, 4 or 5 years ago, you were saying to me that 100% of glass windscreens from cars were going to landfill. Now you've got it down to... So about 80% in the next 12 months will be recycled.
Wow.
Chris turns this stuff into, he breaks down a secret process that he would only show me part of because it was a bit like the Colonel's secret recipe.
If you had to show him the whole thing, you'd have to kill him.
But the beautiful thing I like about this is that he turns that into swimming pool filter material and then exports it to Australia. Don't you love that? Don't you love that the Australians are buying our waste windscreens? I love that.
Could more of the waste levy be put towards people like that who are, R&D, who are coming up with really...
It does. Those are what the grants are for.
And there's also the plastics
Well,
fund
we
as
haven't
well.
had any money from the Waste Minimisation Fund, though. That's the point.
Yeah.
to apply.
You've got to go and get consultants, you've got to spend tens of thousands of dollars to get an application to even looked at, and then there's a higher up, you're going to get rejected.
So just mortgage the house and do it yourself?
No, so the process was streamlined, but I totally agree. It needs to be streamlined more. That's been a lot of feedback from a lot of people.
Yep.
ECA seems to have a system where their grant applications are much smoother. So I think MFE could learn from ECA.
Well, I think they should learn from the industry rather than ECA. Come and talk to the industry.
But you do have to have some accountability for public funds too.
Yeah.
I
And it's all very well for Scott to stand up here and say things like, we'd fund that. But actually there has to be hands, we have to keep our hands off that kind of thing. That is not for politicians to say that we would love to fund it, even though God, it sounds brilliant and I'd love to fund it. But actually we need to have that separation.
But the point is that it's been successful, and Jerem with the Future Post, again, another one, successful hasn't had a red cent of government money, and yet through a process of inventiveness, innovation, and probably cussed determination, stubbornness, making it work. I think that's fantastic. That we should be celebrating that.
But the fund is always oversubscribed, which is great because there's a whole lot of innovation out there, but it can never deliver to all of the applicants.
Yeah, and
So the process does need to get better.
Yeah.
Acknowledged.
easier, most definitely.
Okay, we've got about 5 or 6 minutes. Are there any more questions, comments from the floor? Or would we go to our panellists and give them the last?
I have a question.
Yes.
Curbside collections, soft plastics in or out?
I'd like to see the evidence that it should be in.
I would say in. I currently take mine to the supermarket, but I take it to the supermarket in the communities. So I live in 3 different communities currently. So it works in Tauranga, it doesn't work in Whangarei, and it's difficult in Wellington.
I love now that the scheme is available to the good people of Coromandel, and that finally the Pack and Save supermarket in Thames is able to take my soft plastic, and rather than me having to do what I used to do, which was scrunch it up, and you can compress it quite a lot, take it in my bag to Wellington and then deposit it at the Thorndon supermarket in Wellington. So thank you very much for extending it to Coromandel. Great scheme.
I always wondered what Scott had in his carry-on.
We have a question up the back.
Yes, sorry, it's Nick Baker from Visi. Soft plastics out. I'm dealing with a nightmare of plastics. Plastics and paper, it's all lightweight, it's all flat, it goes everywhere. We've just spent another $100,000 trying to deal with the problem. It's tons and tons of it. It's dirty, filthy, and it's just thrown in the bin. If you want to do something, you've got to educate.
My one of the things I despise is the amount of plastic waste that happens at the building site. We haven't really talked about that stuff. Plastic wrapping that covers everything. Plastic wrapping that covers polystyrene even. But there's huge swathes of plastic in that space, which again, there's a difference between a home and a commercial quantity happening.
Hello, it's Julie here from Tetra Pak. We're a little gobsmacked sitting down here in the naughty corner at the back. Angie, you're representing the Labor Party, the government, who's just put this policy in place about standardising curbside, and you're saying you want to have caps on and you want to have soft plastics in. How does that work? Because we thought you would be representing the party.
Well, I am representing the party, but one of the things that we're also allowed to do in our party is talk about what our views are. So that's the first thing. The second thing is caps should be recycled. I think they should. Whether or not at this point they can't be, but I would see that we need to look towards a positive change and an increase as things go on. So absolutely.
So that's the other question. And this came up earlier talking about the curbside standardisation, which was fairly roundly met with some disappointment in this room. And we really are looking for opportunities to expand that.
Yep.
So at the moment, it says, this is it, bang, and we've set it according to what they can collect and deal with in Geraldine. And so now we know that it's not standardised because the Auckland Council and Christchurch Council have commingling and the others don't. So straight off, if you live in Auckland and you go to the Coromandel, you're going to not have a standardised process. So what is going to be the future view and the process to include other products which could have already been worked on and that have recycling solutions in place?
Yeah, I think we need to get what we're doing right first, and then I mean, I don't see this as that is the end of the system. I think that is the beginning of a system design program that will be added to.
So I hate to say this, but Angie, are you saying that as Angie Warren Clark, or are you saying that as the Labor government?
Well, I'm saying that as both, actually. Because I don't think I don't think the scheme is designed to just be, that's it. No further changes in time.
So is that written? Is there a mechanism for that inclusion?
I think it's getting a little bit unfair on Angie because, to be honest, my experience of actually sitting on Environment Committee with Angie and Eugenie and Scott is that officials come along and they tell us stuff which is blatantly wrong. And they're not listening to industry. They go out and they consult, they receive this information, they go, yeah, thanks, and they write a piece of policy or some regulation that is just clearly not going to work and at cross purposes with what will work. So with all due respect to Angie, she can't possibly answer these questions because the Labor government has failed to grab hold of these officials.
Well, actually,
and
Angie
say,
can
this
speak
is what
for
we
herself.
want, right? They've actually failed. I mean, if the minister could have said, this is the outcome that we want to reduce waste to landfill, which sounds like a laudable idea now, just like it did when I was standing up to my knees in trash back in the 1990s, they could have said that. And all things would flow from a principle or a purpose like that. Instead, they're literally tinkering while valleys fill up with trash. So I'm happy to continue this discussion with the naughty kids at the back, where I usually sit after this panel session.
We've got 2 more questions from the floor.
So same, but can I just make a point? You're assuming that the minister has total decision-making power.
Yeah.
I think you need to do some advocacy to the relevant spokespeople in different parties. Send your submission, when you're doing a submission on the consultation document, to the relevant spokespeople so that they know the issues that you're concerned about. Keep in touch. Rob does a really good job, but ministers aren't all powerful and they've got to convince cabinet colleagues. Officials put up very detailed papers, so MPs have got to know what the issues are for industry and others, and then can have a chance to advocate to try and influence those decisions.
Well, on that basis, it's hardly worth having the minister. So the sad reality is that we probably all agreed 5.5 years ago, or even longer, when we said we need to have standardised curbside recycling. Everybody agreed. Hallelujah, fantastic idea. What's happened in reality is that the word standardised in terms of curbside recycling has become a euphemism for dumbed down. And that's really all it is.
Well, I just don't understand why you couldn't start there, knowing it was going to be pushed down by the bureaucrats to end up midway instead of subterranean.
Again, it comes right back to the infrastructure. It's great to collect things, but what we've seen is the reality of when things are collected and we have nowhere to put it, it goes overseas. And what is that about?
Except that the Tetra Pak people
Have got
a viable use for their product. They need volume, they need critical mass. Wouldn't it be logical to include that in...
Right, we've had a very patient man waiting here with much to say.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Dominic from the Glass Packaging Forum. Thank you all for your positive comments around glass. It's really refreshing to hear that you recognise that Christchurch and Auckland are probably the 2 biggest losses of glass to the system, so thank you for that. My question is not actually about glass, it's about the great work that's been done with expanding and increasing the waste levy. Do you think $60 is enough as a ceiling to make the change that we're talking about here today?
Thanks, Dominic. The advice that in other countries, it's at least $100 a tonne, so it does need to go up. But there was, again, we had to start somewhere. It stepped up and it should really go to at least 100.
I see perverse outcomes in my electorate in the beautiful Coromandel. What happens is that you just get fly tipping. And you get fly tipping at current levels, let alone further increases. And that's not really what we want. So the challenge is, how do you prevent the perverse outcomes? Thames Coromandel District Council and the Hauraki District Council are about to change their collection contractor, and in I think September we'll have another wheelie bin to add to our already sort of blossoming collection of wheelie bins, and that will then go from us buying a plastic bag at the supermarket for I think $1.50 and putting it out each week to a charge of $8 per emptying of your wheelie bin. So that's going to mean that there will be a whole lot of people who are going to be far more careful about what they put in their $8 wheelie bin. That's great, but there will also be a whole lot of people who will say, well, I can't afford $8 in my budget, and I'm going to find somewhere else to put that material that isn't going to cost me $8.
And that's why
the concern that I-
universalism works.
And it's why Auckland Council, aware of this, just stepped up the compliance, monitoring and enforcement to tackle fly tipping, and every time that was reported, it was dealt with. So, yeah.
And a perfect example is in Tauranga, where we went from individual user pays to universalism paid under your rates. And what we've seen is the greater increase in recycling that has occurred. Most of us have also decreased, because now we have 5 bins, most of us have also decreased the amount of just general waste that goes into landfill. And our landfill is taking less across, and so it's actually become a virtuous circle, really, of less going into landfill, more going into recycling and being and going out. So it can happen, and so it's not the $8 you need to pay. It's basically the owner of the property pays, and it's actually $136 a year on your rates.
Okay.
So that's not very much at all, really, when it was $90 plus for one of those bins. So something to think about.
Well, it is if you have a holiday home,
Okay,
you're only there for
question?
6 weeks a year.
Kia ora, Yu from the Warehouse Group. Just a really quick question. What's your party's stance on whether to expand the categories of mandatory product stewardship?
Yes, but again, starting somewhere, those 6 categories, we haven't got schemes for all of those yet. Tyres is well on the way, work being done on electrical goods. We need those schemes to be up and running, and then look at what can we learn from those and move to more categories. So yes, mandatory product stewardship for a whole range of products. Otherwise, the solution ends up in landfill.
And same for us. And again, it's you start somewhere. You start somewhere with mandatory curbside. You start somewhere with product stewardship, and then you build.
Let's make sure what we've got going at the moment works, and then build. Weird to be in agreement with these two.
I think one of the challenges with product stewardship is that New Zealand's at the end of a very, very long supply chain for a lot of our consumer goods. And so we really need to look at what's the most beneficial use of materials that arrive in New Zealand in the form of packaging or end-of-life goods. It may not be practical to return the fridge to their original equipment manufacturer here in New Zealand, as they do in, say, in Europe. So, it's got to be horses for courses. But of course, we also have opportunities here. We don't have to design systems like the rest of the world. We can do things that do fit our size and scale and our ability to pay, because there are communities all around New Zealand which simply can't afford to pay, and imposing one-size-fits-all schemes on them, whether it's product stewardship or whatever it is, are not going to be helpful. It's just going to end up with a whole lot of additional costs forced on local government. And as we know, local government's already suffering from a whole lot of unfunded mandates imposed by this government and previous governments. We actually need to have a close look at what regulation is necessary, what works, and whether it's actually leading to environmental improvements or it's just making us feel good.
Okay, last 2 questions.
Awesome. Rachel Barker from Plastics New Zealand. Firstly, a request. Can you please remember when you're talking about plastic waste exports that we also export all of our aluminium cans, significant amount of our fibre. It is not the only material that's being exported for reprocessing. And then secondly, and this is more probably for Scott and Simon, mainly because I know the other 2 will probably support it. What are your views on the new waste strategy?
If I have a problem with the new waste strategy, it is that there isn't, I think, sufficient involvement of sector players. There is an element of this that has become a theme for the current government, which is essentially Wellington knows best, and I remain utterly convinced that that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some feedback from waste industry operators who've said, look, we've spent so much time talking to MFE about it. It would be helpful if the direction of travel wasn't changed, at least for a while, so we can make some investments and we can get them paying back. So I guess, look, ACT would say if there's regulatory barriers to building waste processing infrastructure, to actually standing up, the kind of renewable energy, gas to energy plant, or waste to energy plant, if that makes sense, with tyres and end-of-life timber and certain plastics that are hard to recycle, then let's make sure the regulatory barriers to achieving that are knocked over, because we need to focus on the ultimate goal. It's reducing the amount of waste to landfill. That's a long-term legacy, going out potentially hundreds or thousands of years that we're conferring on future generations without being able to be confident that we've managed all those risks down to an appropriate and acceptable level.
Just a comment, excuse me, and a clarification importantly. The deed that has been signed between the Ministry and the PPPS scheme is to design a scheme for plastics 1 to 7. The fact that we have 1, 2 and 5 now doesn't change the fact that we are designing a scheme for 1 to 7.
That's right. Future-proofing.
And it is very clear in our discussions with the Ministry that the issue of flexibility for the future is very much built into that thinking. It did create a bit of a curveball for us when it actually came out. However, we've worked through that, and it is now very clear in the conversation with the Ministry that they do want to see the options for 1 to 7 going forward. Thank you.
Excellent.
Good.
And just a last word from our panellists, please. The most important, I suppose, feature, the most important goal for you going into government this year?
Let's start with ACT.
Yeah, sure. So, I think for this group, let's assume that focusing on reducing the size and scale of government, the intervention that government has in so many more aspects of our lives now than it did 6 years ago, actually looking at the regulations that have been established or the new ones that are coming to see whether they're actually going to solve the problems that they claim they will, or they're simply going to add cost and complexity onto doing business. That's a core reason that ACT exists, as well as to protect your private property rights from government and bad people. But when it comes to the environment, we have proposed an alternative to this government's RMA reforms, which we don't think will deliver the certainty, the efficiency and the reduced cost of consenting that Minister David Parker has claimed. The Environment Committee is currently considering a draft of the bill, and the committee will be reporting that back next week to Parliament, so we'll be able to talk about that more fully. Week after, thanks, Eugenie. But what ACT would say is we need to reform the resource management processes so that your private property rights are sacrosanct, focus on property rights first, and establish market-based systems for trading things that are scarce, like water in some regions, or where nutrients are over-allocated to catchments, establishing proper market-based trading systems like they use in Australia and in the US, for example, to actually help achieve a better environment. So look, that would be ACT's overall priorities and specific priorities around resource management reform.
Eugenie.
Just in the waste space, we are committed to having a Minister for Zero Waste because that highlights the intention the Greens would like to put on that portfolio, and to really engaging with the sector, with community organisations, with councils, with all players, so that we do get a decent Waste Minimisation Act, a refreshed strategy, and more extended producer responsibility schemes that are well designed, and that the levy continues to increase, and that money is invested wisely.
Thanks, Eugenie. Look, if, as I said earlier, my colleagues and I have the privilege of leading a new government later this year, we will be confronting what will be the biggest turnaround job in the country's history in terms of getting the country back on track. And in the environmental space, notwithstanding the discussion and the debate that we've had today, I hope that you'll go away thinking that we actually no matter which party we are, we actually have more in common than we have that separates us on particularly these sorts of issues. We argue about the detail, we argue about the style, but the long-term objectives are actually relatively well agreed. And I think that gives us all heart. So from my point of view, we base our environmental policy on the basis that sustainability should be at the core of it, that it should be science and technology led, and that ultimately people respond best to change when they are given the incentives to do so.
Very well said there, Scott. Again, the environment needs to be set at the heart of all that we do, and we will continue on the path that we are currently on, and that is about focusing on all sorts of aspects of the environment. The waste aspect is something that is very close to many people. Everyone can see waste. We can all recognise it, and so there is so much social licence for us to do this work and to continue to do this work. So there is no stopping. There is continuation, and there is doing better, and there is movement of people. And as a grassroots activist, I think that's one of the things that we need to be key and clear about, is the moving forward. It's not just we're here and that's as far as we're getting, it's actually continuing onwards. And so there will continue to be a plan and progress around this space, and without announcing any manifesto policies, I would say watch this space.
Right. You're running out of time, though. It's coming upon us.
121 days, not that we're counting.
Not that you're counting.
All right. Thank you very much to our panellists, to Angie, to Scott, to Eugenie, to Simon for coming along and airing in a free and frank way. A round of applause for our panellists, please.
And to our MC.
Yes, thank you.
Trying not to fall off.
You took my one line away there, Scott.
Sorry, Rob.
So again, thank you, Kerry, for that very insightful and well-managed debate. And again, thank you to Scott, Eugenie, Simon and Angie for being here today and supporting this very important conversation. I think takeouts is really, for us, was really great to hear that you all support the sensibility around glass separate collection. That to us just supports all of our mechanisms for all our material, and that you're going to really consider the science around some of the decisions that you make going forward. Obviously, I'm standing very much between you and some refreshments, so I won't take too long. But I think, there is a milestone event that's going to occur at this election with Eugenie standing down from politics, and I think it's really important that we recognise the effort that she's made in the environmental space. She's always made her door available and open to talk to her, and we really appreciate that. And we know she does take the time to research and really consider what's going on. We might not always agree, but at least the door is open, and I think that's one of the most important things out there.
Thanks, Rob.
So just in recognising that, Eugenie, on behalf of the Packaging Forum, we have donated 10 native trees to be planted on your behalf, and we're hoping those will be planted in Canterbury for you.
Thank you very much.
So on behalf of the Packaging Forum, I'd like to thank you all for your attendance. See you at drinks. Thank you.
Thanks very much.